Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into Jane Austen today, Pride and Prejudice. But we're not just rehashing the romance, we're going deeper.
Deeper into the characters.
Exactly. Specifically, how even the, well, seemingly less important characters make the whole world of the novel so much richer.
Like those characters who might only pop up for a scene or two, but they really stick with you.
Yes. And we've got some great literary criticism to guide us here.
It's really fascinating stuff.
Okay, so something that struck me right away in this criticism, they talk about how good Austen is with dialogue, like really good.
Oh, absolutely. The critic makes the point that great dialogue in a novel, it's actually pretty rare.
And so important.
Yeah, they actually say that a novel that has like truly amazing dialogue
Can be better than one that has a perfect plot, but the characters are dull.
Exactly. It's like, have you ever read a book or even watched a movie where the dialogue just feels so flat?
All the time. You're just like, come on, these people don't sound real at all.
Right. And this critic, they had this amazing image to describe that.
What was it?
They said reading bad dialogue is like watching, get this, puppets with pebbles in their mouths.
Haha, that's perfect. You just imagine these clunky, lifeless puppets trying to talk.
It's so true. And it highlights how essential good dialogue is to bringing characters to life. It's how we get to know them, hear their voices, and ultimately connect with them as readers.
Totally. Okay, so this critic seems especially fond of Mr. Collins.
Oh yeah, Elizabeth's awkward suitor.
Right, the clergyman. And they actually defend him as a well-crafted, realistic character.
Which, I mean, he is pretty over the top.
He is. But the critic argues that he's actually brilliantly done.
And I think what makes him so effective is how Austen uses other characters to kind of bounce off of his ridiculousness.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Think about Mr. Bennet, Elizabeth's father. He's constantly subtly making fun of Mr. Collins, just drawing attention to how absurd he is.
Yeah, and it's always so subtle and witty.
Right. And then you've got Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
Oh, she's a piece of work.
She is. And she actually kind of compliments Mr. Collins in a strange way. They're both so obsessed with social status and propriety.
But in completely different ways.
Exactly. And it's through those interactions that their individual quirks become even more apparent.
It's like they highlight each other's absurdity.
Exactly. It's like they're two sides of the same coin. And Austen isn't just doing this for laughs. She's also exposing the kind of hypocrisy and absurdity of the social norms they're so obsessed with.
It's like she's subtly critiquing her own society through these characters.
Exactly. And that's where the element of satire comes in. The critic even compares Austen's satirical voice to, like, Jonathan Swift, Henry Fielding.
Wow, some serious literary heavy hitters.
Right, like Thackeray. She's in good company.
So, can you break down what makes satire so effective, especially in Austen's hands?
Well, at its core, satire uses humor and wit to expose flaws, often within a society or a particular group of people. And Austen does this brilliantly by creating characters who are both entertaining and kind of thought-provoking.
So we're laughing at them, but also maybe recognizing something familiar in their behavior?
Exactly. And Austen does it so subtly. It's woven into the narrative. It's not like she's hitting you over the head with it.
It's not preachy at all. It's more like, look at these silly people, but also, hey, maybe we're all a little silly sometimes.
Precisely. It's that nuance that makes her satire so effective. And it's not just the main characters who contribute to this, right?
The critic also mentions Austen's minor characters, how even those who appear briefly add to the story.
Absolutely. Austen understood that a believable world needs a diverse cast. Even those who are only there for a few lines, they help make the social landscape richer.
They make it feel like we're peeking into a real community with all its different personalities.
Exactly. It's not just about the main players. It's about the whole ensemble.
Let's talk about Mrs. Bennet for a minute. I mean, she's kind of a caricature, right? The overbearing mother obsessed with marrying off her daughters.
She can be a bit much, yeah.
But, I mean, do you think there's more to her than that?
I think there's a lot more going on there than we might realize at first.
Hmm.
Yes, her anxieties about her daughter's futures are often played for laughs.
But, I mean, she's not entirely wrong to be worried.
Right. We have to remember the context. This is a time when women's options were extremely limited.
A good marriage was pretty much the only path to security.
Exactly. So while her behavior can seem ridiculous to us now, it actually makes a lot of sense given the social pressures of the time.
It's a reminder to always consider the context, right?
Absolutely. And that's what makes Austen's characters so compelling. They're not just stereotypes. They're real people shaped by their world.
Okay, and then we've got Kitty and Lydia, Elizabeth's younger sisters. The critic calls them examples of youthful folly.
That's a good way to put it.
Hmm.
But I think they each bring something unique to the story.
I agree.
Lydia, especially, with her impulsiveness.
That elopement with Wickham almost ruined the family.
Right. It shows the very real dangers for young women in a society so obsessed with reputation.
And then Kitty kind of following along with Lydia, almost like she's susceptible to peer pressure.
Exactly. They both represent different facets of, like, growing up and making mistakes, but the stakes are incredibly high.
So even in these minor characters, Austen is exploring some pretty big themes.
Exactly. Social pressure, individual choice, the challenges of being a young woman in that society.
Austen really packs it in. It's amazing how much depth she gives to even these seemingly smaller characters.
It's part of what makes Pride and Prejudice such a masterpiece, I think. That attention to detail, that fully realized world.
Okay, I think we're ready to talk about the character everyone's been waiting for, Elizabeth Bennet.
Oh, she's a favorite.
This critic, they describe Elizabeth's charm as something felt rather than explained, which is interesting. What do you think makes her so captivating?
You know, that's a great question, and one I think we should save for next time, because there's a lot to unpack there.
I agree. So we'll pick up with Elizabeth in our next part. See y'all then. Okay, so we left off talking about Elizabeth Bennet and what makes her such a fascinating character.
Right.
This critic, they called her charming, but in a way that's hard to pin down. Like, her charm is felt rather than explained.
It's true, isn't it? It's like Austen does this thing where she doesn't give us these super detailed physical descriptions of her heroines. So with Elizabeth, it's not just about, outer beauty or something.
Right, it's something more.
Exactly. It's her intelligence, her wit, that spark, that ability to really hold her own in a conversation, which, remember, wasn't exactly encouraged in women back then. She kind of challenges expectations just by being herself.
Which is interesting because you think about how Darcy first describes her. Tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me. Ouch.
I know. Talk about a first impression.
So, what do you think Darcy actually saw in Elizabeth during those early meetings? Because clearly something changed.
I think even if he didn't want to admit it at first, he was intrigued by her. She was different. Elizabeth had this spirit, this quick wit, and she wasn't intimidated by him at all. And Darcy, well, he probably didn't meet many women like that, especially in his social circle.
She didn't fit the mold of what he thought he wanted.
Right. And I think that's part of what drew him to her. She was a challenge, a puzzle he couldn't figure out. And then, as the story goes on, we see that initial disdain kind of melt away. It turns into admiration and eventually, of course, love. And it's all because he starts to really see her character.
So it's not just about looks, it's about Elizabeth's mind, her personality that wins him over.
Absolutely. Darcy eventually sees past all those social prejudices that were clouding his judgment. He recognizes a kindred spirit in Elizabeth, someone who can match him intellectually.
But, the relationship isn't exactly smooth sailing. They have all those misunderstandings, that pride on both sides.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of back and forth.
Elizabeth misjudges Darcy because of Wickham's lies, and then she's blinded by her own prejudice.
Exactly. It's that push and pull between Pride and Prejudice that creates so much of the conflict.
They both make mistakes, big ones.
They do. And they have to learn from them. It's not this, instant love story. They have to work for it.
And their families don't exactly make things easier, do they?
Oh, definitely not. Elizabeth's family, well, they're a handful.
To say the least.
Mrs. Bennet and those younger sisters, they definitely contribute to the drama. Remember when Lydia elopes with Wickham?
It almost ruined the family.
Right. And it really highlights how vulnerable women were back then.
Yeah.
One wrong move and your reputation was shattered.
And then you have Darcy, who comes from this world of wealth and privilege, but he's not exactly happy.
No, not at all. His upbringing is completely different from Elizabeth's. He's got all this responsibility, this awareness of his family name, his place in society. It explains why he's so reserved, why he struggles to show his feelings.
Like he's trapped by all those expectations.
Yes. And it's Elizabeth, someone who doesn't play by those rules, who helps him break free from that.
She challenges him to be more open.
Exactly. He learns to be vulnerable, to show humility, things he probably never learned in his own world.
It's interesting, right? The contrast between the two families. Elizabeth, she comes from this chaotic, kind of embarrassing family, but she's got this strong sense of self, this loyalty to those she loves. And Darcy, he's got the money, the status, but he's missing those genuine connections.
It makes you think about what really matters, doesn't it? Social standing versus genuine character.
Austen is always making us question that, isn't she?
She is. She's such a clever writer. It's
Yeah.
not just the plot. It's the way she uses dialogue. observation to reveal her characters. She doesn't tell you what to think.
You have to figure it out yourself.
Exactly. And that's what keeps people coming back to Pride and Prejudice, I think. There's always something new to discover.
So speaking of new discoveries, I think we need to talk about that ending. It's a happy ending, for sure, but this critic seems to suggest there's more to it than meets the eye.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, so we're back, and we're wrapping up our look at Pride and Prejudice. We've talked about, all these different aspects of Austen's writing.
The dialogue, the satire, how complex the characters are, even the ones you think aren't so important at first.
Right, and now we're at the ending. And of course, it's a happy one. I mean, you've got weddings, hints of more romances to come.
It is a happy ending, on the surface at least.
But the critic we're talking about, they seem to think there's more to it than that. It's not just a simple happily ever after.
Exactly. Austen doesn't really tie everything up in a neat little bow. She leaves us with some questions, like what's going to happen with this marriage, with Elizabeth and Darcy? They're such different people.
And their families are so different.
Right. It's not going to be all sunshine and roses, is it?
So the wedding is kind of just the beginning.
I think so. I mean, think about it. Elizabeth, she's stepping into this whole new world of wealth and privilege.
A world she's never known.
Exactly. And Darcy, well, he's connected to the Bennets now. With all their quirks.
Mrs. Bennet's probably already picking out the china patterns for their first anniversary party.
Oh, for sure. But beyond the jokes, there's a real point here.
Yeah.
These two families, they're going to have to find a way to get along. And it's not going to be easy.
And it's not just the families, right? It's Elizabeth and Darcy themselves. They've both had to change so much throughout the story.
They have.
To overcome their flaws, their pride and their prejudice.
And that journey doesn't just stop because they get married.
So in a way, the marriage itself is another challenge for them.
Exactly. It's about navigating those differences, figuring out how to compromise without losing yourself.
Finding that balance, right?
Yeah. And I think Austen is suggesting that that's where real happiness comes from. Not from a fairy tale ending, but from choosing a partner who helps you grow.
Who makes you a better person.
Exactly. It's not about finding someone who completes you. It's about finding someone who challenges you in a good way.
And that's what Elizabeth and Darcy do for each other, right?
They push each other to see things differently, to confront their own biases.
Their relationship, it's this constant back and forth, but it's how they grow.
And it's not always pretty or easy.
No, but it feels real.
It does. And that's what makes Pride and Prejudice so great. It's not just a love story. It's a story about life, about how complicated relationships can be.
And it stays with you, long after you finish the book.
Oh, absolutely.
So, there you have it. We've reached the end of our deep dive into Pride and Prejudice. And I don't know about you, but I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for the story.
Me too. Austen really was a genius, wasn't she?
She really was. I mean, she was writing over 200 years ago, but her characters, their struggles, they still feel so relevant today.
They do. That's why we keep coming back to her, right?
Exactly.
And we hope this deep dive has given you all some new things to think about, maybe inspired you to revisit Pride and Prejudice, or even check out some of her other books.
Because there's a whole world to explore there.
There is. Austen's world. It's witty, it's sharp, it's full of life.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. And until next time, happy reading.